Mark Ferguson. Welcome to the Shedding Summit that we're calling tonight. We've got this group of gurus here who are all sheep breeders or researchers from various parts of the world. Opportunity tonight just to hear from their views. I'll be monitoring the chat, so put your questions in there, and I'll make sure that I get them through to Emma and get them or chuck them out into the ether as well. So be as interactive as it can. We've got a list of questions that we'll run through, but make sure you get your questions answered. We're scheduled for an hour, but there's no chance we're going to keep these blokes to an hour. So we'll roll a bit longer than that, but we'll try and get most of it done in an hour, most of the key bits done in an hour, so people can get on with their day if that's the plan. But we'll hang around a bit longer than that. I'm going to hand over to Dr. Emma Pettigrew. So Emma's based in the North Island. She's a senior consultant with us at NextGen Agri. She's done a PhD up there at Massey University. Long history of sheep breeding in the family. Her mother being a sheep tragic as well. I'll introduce Emma and she'll take over, and I'll be here in the background.
Yeah, thanks, Ferg. So I've joined NextGen just under a year ago now. Prior to that, I was working at Wairere and helped bring the nudies into New Zealand as well. So plenty of shedding sheep and work with a few shedding clients across the North Island of New Zealand. We'll start off the summit. If our panel could go around and just do a bit of who you are, where you're farming, the type of shedding sheep, size of the flock, how long you've been shedding, and what you've changed from, if it's how it's impacted your enterprise. Just a quick go around. Who wants to start first?
Hi all, Daniel Wheeler, farm in North Canterbury, just out of Emily, South Island. Main career is a sheep scanner. Been scanning for 35 odd years now. Alongside that, I run about 800 ewes, comprising 100 fin, pure Finnish landrace ewes, which is, I think, the largest and possibly the only still recorded fin flock in New Zealand. And then a Texel flock as well, which has a fin infusion, so keeping tails short and fertility up. And then alongside that, a shedding flock, originally based on the Meat Master breed standard out of South Africa, but evolved a little bit since then. It's largely Texel fin, a little bit of Dorper, a little bit of Wiltshire, a little bit of Damara, largely Texel fin still.
How's that impacted your enterprise?
Keeps the workload down. So I'm away 2.5 months of the year overseas scanning and 3 months of the year scanning here. So have to have sheep that don't require too much input. So big emphasis on those labour intensive traits, dags and worming and things like that, tailing. Haven't tailed a sheep. I'll tell a small eye, we've expanded the flock this year a bit, and we did buy a couple of hundred Romanies in, so we have tailed their lambs, but I haven't tailed any of my own lambs since 1993. Very, very much about that, keeping that labour requirement low so that other people can look after my sheep when I'm not here.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. I'm Dawson Bradford. I farm in Western Australia, about 150 k's southeast of Perth, in a 450 mil rainfall, because it's a dry summer. We're just coming into summer now, and a short, about a 5-month winter. So we have a lot of drought in terms of green feed. Our main production is in meat. We run about 10,000 ultra white ewes, lambing in every 8 months to turn off suckers and also seed stock. Run a 1,400 sow piggery, turning off between 30 and 35,000 bacon a year. Staff, of course, of about 20. But the business now is run mainly by my son, who does everything bar the sheep, which my wife and I have done until recently, and I've pulled back a bit now, and I'm only doing the stud work. Over 1,000 ewes. I've also got a grandson in the business. I think that best sums up enough.
Cool. Ross?
How you going, everyone? Ross Richards, farming in the centre of the North Island, bit north of Mount Ruapehu and a little bit 20 k's east of Taumarunui, for those who know where that is. 700 hectares. We run 60-40 sheep to cattle ratio. So breeding cows right through to finishing all the progeny from them. We've got about 600 stud Coopworth ewes, lambing, about 400 shedding sheep, mainly Wiltshire stud, and then about 3,000 ewes all up. So the rest of them are just commercial Coopworths mainly. Yeah, that's about us really. In contrast to Dawson's 450 mil rainfall, we're normally around the 12 or 1300, but 12 months June to June was only 900. So we've had a dry summer and autumn and quite a dry winter.
Rob Costin. We farm in Victoria, Australia, south coast of Victoria, about 3 hours southwest of Melbourne, right on the coast. We're 1,200 mil rainfall and farm a bit over 1,600 hectares. Join around 8,000 ewes, including ewe lambs, and around 450 breeding cows. Got into shedders, been maternal composites for a fair while, and then got into shedders in 2020. So about 5 years into them, bit of a mix of buying in some maternal composite shedding sheep and also crossbreeding our way over in our maternal flock, I guess. And then, got Ferg involved about 4 years ago and went down the full performance recorded route. And we just, last year was sort of our first go at selling rams, and we're sort of going that way, but relatively new to it compared to plenty of the others here tonight. Definitely seeing reduction in workload and obviously shearing costs. The old bills come down a fair bit there, and just enjoying breeding it. Pretty good sheep that gets it done with minimal work, I guess.
Probably the odd one out, because if I count my own sheep, there's 6 of them. But involved in research looking at the genetics and performance of going towards a shedding breed of sheep from a woolly base, effectively. So far we've put about 4,500 phenotypes through. So it's about 4,500 sheep through that breeding program. We were taking DNA samples from all of them and trying to see if we can sort of untangle what's happening behind the scenes and see if there's any way that we can help speed up the shift from woolly things that need shearing to some lower impact, lower maintenance animals. Based at Massey University here in New Zealand, so get a plug in for the employer.
Cool. So does anyone want to talk through their grading up process, sort of thinking about the timeline, how long it took to get, I guess, through to a non-shearing sheep, and any management changes along the way, whether you were dipping less, dagging less, drenching less, notice less fly strike, and another with the grading up process, any sort of paddock mess. There's definitely a lot of talk about the wool left in the paddock and things on the shedders, in particular the grading up. And what point do you call them a shedder? So we start with Rob first.
So we're a few years in. We're definitely not full transitioned yet, but probably took me a little bit of time to get my head around sort of what you're trying to achieve and how you sort of manage the different sheep from the different, whether it's an F1 and F2 and F, or past that. At the start, it was like, we've got to find a way of tracking them, whether it's electronic tags, which obviously do that, but I don't mind visual stuff as well. And then we sort of realised that it probably didn't matter what they were. It was, everything's around a bell curve, and you're going to have, in an F1, you're going to have sheep that are shedding better and sheep that are shedding worse, and the same in F2s. You'll have both extremes around that bell curve. So we treat them joining time's a pretty good time to they've completed their shedding. So for us, we in our commercial setup, we correctively mate the shedding sort of side of it. At joining time, it's through the draft, and it's the real cleans, the mids, and the woollier ones. We do, and then they essentially get run in those groups of ones that, definitely need a bit of wool management. After a first cross, none of ours get crutched. You do pick up a few dags late spring. Just speaking from our own experiences, we pick up a few dags then, and generally they're gone by Christmas. We shear in January, and the shearers, when they're shearing bare-bellied, bare-necked, bare-headed sheep, if the odd one comes through with a bit of dag on it, there's not a complaint there. I think the first time we've had shearers and they all did over 100 a run in our shed was on F1s, and they were smiling. So we've noticed that. We didn't really expect that to remove the crutching side of it, but that happened in the first cross, and we probably had 10% of those first cross animals that didn't need shearing and haven't been shorn since, and that really jumped to maybe 60%, 65% in the second cross, and then pretty good after that. But I don't know. That's my experiences so far. Paddock mess. Right now, it's probably the height of shedding, and we see more of it in the paddock, and you probably see a little bit more of it on fences right at the moment. And then, 2 months ago before they were shedding, or 3 months ago before they were shedding, you don't really notice anything. You find the odd spot on a fence where they decide to pick apart and they want to go for it, but it's pretty rare that you get those issues. And the paddock stuff, you'll see it in the paddocks now, but it's gone in no time. I don't know. There must be some good birds' nests and that biodegrades. So it disappears pretty quickly.
Yeah, a high wind area will get it to be.
Yeah. We've got 120k winds coming tomorrow, so it might be gone by tomorrow night.
Perfect. Ross.
We've kind of gone in the opposite direction to most people with the shedding sheep, in that we've been putting Coopworth into the shedding flock to get the great traits that our Coopworths have got into the shedding sheep. The Coopworth flock's very fertile, extremely eczema tolerant, very worm tolerant, great temperament. If you could stop the buggers growing wool, you wouldn't muck around with the shedding sheep. But the only way to stop them growing wool is to muck around with the shedding sheep. So that's what we're doing. They're chalk and cheese in terms of temperament in some of the other traits, but we're making good progress on improving them. The paddock mess thing amuses me, that because I'm pretty old-fashioned. We still tag lambs at Perth as much to upset the sheep and disturb them as anything, so that I can see who's going to be a good mum and who's not. But you go out in the morning to tag lambs, and there'll be the outline of a sheep where she's been sitting down and the wool's all fallen off her during the night. So it's a bit like a crime scene where the body shape's outlined in little bits of fluff. I don't know whether the birds come and peck it out or whether it actually just falls out in little clumps. But our shedding sheep don't grow a lot of wool anyway, and it disappears pretty quick. So not too worried there. At the same time as putting Coopworth into the shedding sheep, we've been putting Wiltshire into the Coopworths. So to speed up getting rid of the dags off our commercial flock, the last couple of years that our replacements at Coopworth was in the maternal flock have all been quarter Wiltshire. The interesting thing there was when we came to dagging them as Tudors last year, there was actually less dags in the Coopworth than there was in the quarter Wiltshire, 3/4 Coopworth commercials. So that just illustrates the power of performance recording, because all of those recorded Tudors were by rams with a good dag score index. So that's just been an interesting thing I've sort of observed. Better give someone else a crack.
Yeah, Dawson.
Thanks, Emma. Yeah, well, we've been running shedding sheep. We started in 2005, following a health scare I had myself with cancer, and realised that I had to get rid of some of the workload. And at the time, I was running just about, I think about 7,000 Pole Dorset ewes. Sorry, 3,000 Pole Dorset ewes and 4,000 merinos. And all the work, a big percentage of the work was in the wool and wool-related matters. So, and I was never a big fan of wool. Meat has always been my love in production. So I started looking around the world to see if there was a good shedding breed that we could get and multiply and come up with something that would suit our area. And as I said before, we're Mediterranean type climate, so we've got the dry summers, so we've got virtually drought, and then we've got plenty of feed in the winter. I looked around the world, and there was not a breed that would do justice to the conditions that we have here, that could stand the hard summer and could flourish in the better times of the year. So really, I was left with the option either carrying on and reduce the sheep numbers or get rid of the wool. And so I just chose to get rid of the wool off the Dorset. We had quite a large Pole Dorset stud that was fairly well placed, and I had to start finding out how to get rid of the wool. Now, as it turned out, the Pole Dorset is one of the hardest breeds of the sheep breeds to get the wool off. So I certainly struck plenty of obstacles on the way through. Not that it really worried me about getting the wool off quickly, because my main aim always has been to produce meat, produce quality meat and plenty of it. And wool was a secondary part of it. But anyway, we started out, I chose two breeds to try and get the wool off. One was the Wiltshire Horn and the other was a Dorper. The Wiltshire Horn certainly got the wool off a bit quicker than the Dorper, but there was just too many deficiencies, particularly in muscling, and the other was in horns and the non-breeding season, which we treasured in the Dorset. So they put themselves out because of that. The Dorper I'm talking about the white Dorper, had a few good qualities, but many bad traits that we didn't need. And one of them was it wasn't a good shedder. So I eventually got to the stage where I went to a double cross of Dorper, so that made it a 75% Dorper, 25% Dorset, and we started to get rid of the wool at that stage. Along the way, I had observed that the ewes that you start with, the less wool they have on them, like you get bare-headed Dorsets, bare bellies, that sort of thing. That, pardon me, that is part of the shedding gene, or one of the genes, and that helps. The wool came off those sheep a lot quicker than the muffy face Dorset that we see too much of. So it wasn't until about 2010 we had a drought over here. We had, I think it was 250 or just under 250 mil of rain for the season, which is fairly dry, and the hardiness in the sheep showed up. And it was interesting when we scanned the ewes at at 70 days after mating, the ewes that were second cross, the double cross of Dorpers, had one condition score better than the first cross. And the first cross was struggling, the second cross were doing it easy. And that to me just gave us the clear indication there was a hardiness factor in the Dorper, and that's what we were really chasing. The other bonus that came through then was small lambs. Being Dorset breeders, birth weight was a huge issue, and the faster you had them growing, the bigger the problem. But with the Dorper, it was very low, almost to the stage where you think it's too low. But the hardiness of those lambs and the willingness to get on and live is tremendous. So that was a bonus, along with probably a couple others that don't come to mind at the moment. But that was what we started out with. So from there, we were always looking for an easy care sheep. Shedding wasn't 100% necessary, but we needed to cut the workload down. So I was really looking on an easy care sheep that we could mate, feed them, put them into the lambing paddock, let them lamb on their own. Our property is too large to go around every day and check, so they've got to do it on their own with a minimal of care. But still, we've got to observe good animal welfare management. And we achieved this. As I said, the birth weights are very low, and we went along fairly well. It was about 2014 before we actually named the breed, and that was about a stage when, through crossing, we were starting to get to something like the sort of sheep I wanted. And I really wanted a fast-growing sheep on a four legs with plenty of meat, and that's basically what I've always tried to do. It was about 2014 when we started to see some progress in that area, and from then on, that was when we decided to change the name, and we changed to an ultralight as to get away from the easy care, which was a pretty generic sort of a name, and a lot of people were using it. Went along, then the thing that probably struck me when we got into the business was the lack of how quickly the sheep returned to good condition after they weaned their lamb. In fact, it was pretty ordinary. They got damn fat on very little. And I said, well, and we were getting about 115, 120% lambing percentage weaned at that stage. So surely these sheep can do better than that. If they don't grow wool, surely they can rear a second lamb. And some of them were doing it and doing it very well. So that started my search around the world, once again, looking for a gene that would give us at least twins and very few triplets. I did find a gene, but it was in England, and a gene called the DF9, something else, I forget the other figures, but I had no way of getting it to Australia. Fortunately, Ferg found this for me. He knew that I was looking out for it, and he found it in the South Island, New Zealand, and I managed to get some semen from that ram. Unfortunately, the ram, now I'm going to run against it, might run foul of some of the other speakers, but the ram was a Coopworth textual cross. Now, there was nothing in the Coopworth textual cross that I really wanted. I didn't want their wool. I didn't want the fineness of the bone in them, the short neck, the lambing difficulties. But anyway, after about 3 generations, we started to get rid of that and progress that to the stage where in 2021, I think we actually released our first what we call HF pluses. You could say it's Hillcroft Farms, but it's high fertility plus rams, and they've lifted our percentages quite considerably. So really, I've had 2 goes at starting up a cross breed or a composite breed. The first one, the ultralights, was really starting to kick goals, and now it takes a long time to settle a new breed down, if that's what you want to do. And my aim is to produce not one good sheep, but a flock of good sheep, all very similar, that are a complete breed of sheep in as much as they're maternal and paternal, to more or less looking at what the Romanis were doing at the time. And I think we're getting very close to that, but it takes a long time to settle that down. And I reckon with ultralights, we're just starting to do that. With the HF flushes, we're probably 2 or 3 generations off it yet. I think I'll leave it there, Emma. I feel as I've talked long enough, but I need to talk later.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Dawson. And Daniel, your experience with the grading up.
Hi. So I started a sheep breeding journey in '94 with a small flock of fin ewes, and have had fins ever since for my sons. In fact, I suspect in New Zealand at the moment, I probably own 3/4 of the fins in the country. So I started them, then I had a small fin Romani flock for a while, and they were all right, but they didn't really fire. And then we replaced the fin Romanis with fin Texels and found that to be a much better mix. So since the late 90s, I've been breeding a fin Texel based composite, ranging from half fin, half Texel first crosses through to 7/8 Texel, but always maintained a fin component. Selected for low dag scores. I've got a passionate hatred of dagging. And also with the fins, realised we didn't really need to tail them, so we stopped tailing as well, or docking, depending on where you come from. So I've always run short-tailed, beer breeched, beer bellied. In the early 2000s, I bought what was supposedly quite a good terminal Texel ram who was quite beer bellied and beer necked. Unfortunately, he didn't fire, so we finished up with 100% empty in the ewes. The day I realised that the ram wasn't working, we were starting to set hold of a repeat, so I happened to be scanning a flock that had a couple of Dorper rams out. So we grabbed the 2 Dorper rams and took them home and produced some first cross Dorpers. The next year produced some first cross Wiltshires for the Wiltshire ram. So that was my start of my journey. So that was based on fin and fin Texel ewes. And we've just built up that flock. I tended to concentrate on the Afro shedders, so the Dorpers and the Damaras, mostly around research on meat quality, high IMF and good meat quality. So, and the fin, of course, it has a poor carcass, has very high meat quality. So we've finished up with a flock that's largely Texel based. I think the ewes average about 45% Texel, average about 20% fin, and the remaining bits are Dorper and Damara and a little bit of Wiltshire. The last couple of years I've used some ex-Laners semen, I've used some nudie semen from Australia, which was a little bit roundabout because Dawson alluded to GDF9. So the year that Dawson bought the Texel Coopworth ram with GDF9, I sent a partially shedding 3/4 Texel quarter fin ram to Australia that was double copy GDF9. He finished up and used in the nudie studs in Victoria, and so one of the nudie rams I used was a grandson of the ram I'd sent over a few years before. And on the back of the ex-Laner, I've used a couple of Wiltshire Cross ex-Laner rams this year as well. Cleaning get a little bit carried away last year buying a ram. For my sons, I have a bad habit of buying or getting woolly rams and putting them back over shedding ewes. So I regularly walk a tightrope around shedding. So we've got some Texel ewes that are part shedding. We've bought a number of full shedding Texels. I think I've got 3 full shedding Texels at the moment. So we're transitioning some of those fin Texel ewes into full shedding ewes without any traditional shedding sheep in the background. The other thing that I felt the Afro shedders bought was hairy birth coats. I've got a good friend on the west coast of the South Island who runs Dorpers and Dorper cross ewes. So he's in a 4.5 metre rainfall. Probably nearly got that today, I think. And he commented that in torrential rain, the hairy lambs all lived and the wool blue birth coat lambs all died. So I started recording that and realised that was the case. So we selected very heavily for hair birth coat as well. We don't have as many hairy lambs now as we used to on the back of those nudie and ex-Laner and Wiltshire genetics coming in. But we still maintain, or try to maintain as much of a hair coat as we can. it effectively makes the lambs weatherproof. They do not die of the weather. And at the moment, we maintain a flock. Close to half of the recorded ewes are shedders, and a quarter of them are fin texels and a quarter of them are fins. We've just expanded. We've just leased a farm. So we did have to buy ewes in, commercial ewes in, and we did buy Romneys. So we've got a reasonable chunk of Romney ewes at the moment. So I'd like to say I spent the day dagging Romney ewes, but I didn't. I paid 2 other people to dag Romney ewes for me. So that's where we're at with, and we've called them meat masters, which are loosely based on the South African breed standard for meat masters. So.
Cool. And so, Nick, have you got any of the results so far? How far through is the grading up process in the Massey study? How many generations to get to non-shearing?
Yeah. So one, if you want to get rid of like 99% of your lamb crop, you can do it in 1 generation, and you just keep the 1 lamb in 100 that is fully shedding. So we did started in 2020, which people may remember was a slightly difficult year for moving things around the place. So literally, I think 2 weeks before New Zealand went into lockdown, the rams turned up on farm to be used at the Riverside flock. So we put 250 Romney ewes to Wiltshire, polled Wiltshire rams that year. And then at the end of the year, we started having them and scoring them. So we score our lambs every year in February from the year before. So in that first crop of lambs, about 60% of them didn't show any sign of shedding at all in February. So they were all woolly. They even had wool on their bellies. They just looked like slightly scruffy Romneys. And then when we switched over to the next generation, so every generation of hoggets has been mated back to Wiltshire rams, and the next generation we went down to less than 20% of the those lambs didn't shed at all. And in that generation, we started getting scores of 4, which means basically you've got a little bit of wool running along the top of the spine, and the rest of the lamb is completely nude by February. Then we did 3rd cross. So this year's ones are 15/16 Wiltshire. So every generation we've done this. That's generation 4 now, and they're shedding quite nicely, to the extent where one of the research or teaching farmlets over on this side of the hill in Palmy has actually started getting the reject ewes, the ones that we don't deem good enough shedding. They're coming back over to one of the Massey flocks, and the students have them as their teaching sheep that they run each year because they don't have to do shearing and dagging on those flocks. Alongside that trial that we had over at Riverside, a year later, so in 2021, we did a mating on Limestone Downs station up in Port Waikato, so just south of Auckland. And that one we put, I think it was 2,500 woolly type sheep to Wiltshires and generated about 3,000 lambs. So we kept all of the ewe lambs out of that, so those first cross. So in there, we probably had somewhere in the region of 150 to 160 ewe lambs that were shedding enough that you'd be happy to just leave them without having to shear them. Everything else needed some form of intervention. But because we're like trying out some science and trying some cool stuff, we actually mated them all back to their half brothers to get the admixture of all of their genes so that we can try and pull it all apart. So we generated another 2,000 lambs doing that. So those are all our genotypes and phenotypes that we're now dealing with. So yeah, Riverside is now at the point where the ewes are pretty much all shedding. They're giving birth to lambs that are fully shedding. So that's 5 years since we started. And we our rough numbers at the moment say that somewhere between 8 to 10 years from start to everything in the flock is losing its wool. But that will rely on having a good set of genes come through with the sires that you swap in every year.
Yeah, just for everyone that's not as familiar with the Riverside Farm and the Limestone Downs Farm, Limestone Downs being up in the Waikato there, would there have been a bit more Kirkworth influence in that initial flock, given that it's a high FE sort of an area?
There had been in the past, but that was a very admixture flock.
Yep.
So the Riverside flock was a very heavy Romani baseline in there. The Limestone Downs flock has benefited, we'll go with benefited, from different research projects over the years trying different breeds. So they've used East Friesians and Finns, they've used Perrindales, Coopworths, Romneys, and then kept the best progeny from those. So they have that was a real admixture flock.
Yeah.
Where you'd grab this lamb out to score it, so you'd drag them out over the board to work out how much wool's been lost. And here's this thing with a bright pink nose and a very Finn/East Friesian looking thing, looking straight up at it, and you go, it doesn't look like either one of our parents we've got there. So
yeah, just wondering if the maternal base in that flock was a little bit barer than the Riverside flock.
So
results.
The Riverside flock is definitely a very woolly, like they'd have wool on the bottom of their feet if they could.
Yeah, cool. So I guess that gets into a bit of the wool type stuff. There's a lot of talk about the shedders growing a fleece and then shedding it and putting energy into growing that wool versus the hair type, which, and whether it is a wool-ish coat that's a whole lot shorter or an actual hair type a bit more like a goat. But where is everyone sort of aiming on that scale of things? Do you just want them non-shearing, or do you want them actually just producing less and less fleece in the first place so they don't have to shed it?
Yeah. Sorry, you go, Dawson.
Oh, it's something that I've always been very conscious of. When we started in the Dorper cross lamb, Dorper cross lambs, there were these ones that had the hair, it was a soft hair, but as thick as a hair on a cat's back. I think that was probably the ideal and one we'll be going back to. But at the time, we had too many things to select from, and I chose to go with the meat all the time. But I think people are on the right track in you want a soft hair. Certainly don't want a harsh hair. I don't believe that. A lot of meat quality, I believe, is tied to harsh hair or poor quality. But also, good meat is quality is, of course, attached to the wool. And we found in Pole Dorset, the more wool on their face was, the better quality meat they had. And I think the old Southdown breed was similar. So there's a few contradictions there, but I think that's the way we've got to go, particularly with people like you're saying, in wet weather. It's the lambs with that silky, hairy coat that seem to survive better than the wool coat. Although you get breeds like the Wilty doesn't seem to carry as much hair in the wool hair coat, but they still survive in the winter time. So I'm not sure if we've got 100% the answers, but I think that's the trend we'll go.
Cool. And docking and tailing, how have you been selecting for shorter tails or hairier tails or anything along that line, or still docking them? What's the...
I've been selecting, well, we had short tails anyway because Texels have short tails and Finns have stupid short tails. So that was a trait. That was one of the big things the Dorper brought to the table as well, was a short tail. The Tamara, of course, didn't it, or a great big huge tail. But yeah, so we select for short tails, but short tails is a little bit of what you're used to. I had a ram here that I considered selling or killing because I thought his tail was too long, and then someone else bought him because they thought his tail was short. So there's a little bit of what you're used to. certainly for us, with the East-Lana and Wiltshire blood added in and the Nudie blood, our tails have shot down, and now starting to see a few tails below the hock, whereas previously most of our tails were well above the hock, and some of them would be maybe a third of the way to the hock. The fins typically about a quarter of the way. As far as docking goes and dags, in my opinion, 90% of the reason for dags is what's happening inside the sheep, not outside the sheep. And in actual fact, my fin texels have a lower average dag score than my shedders. And the fins are slightly worse, but the fin texels. So that's more about what's happening inside the sheep than outside the sheep. So it's still important to remember what the root cause of dags is, and that's a crock stomach.
Any comment on that one, Rob?
Yeah, we're probably a little bit different. We're not worrying about tail length at all at the moment. This is just me thinking, but I think if I probably started to try to select on tail length too much, I'd have to give up on a lot of the productivity traits on other areas that we're trying to really push along. We have a fair heavy influence of woolly maternal composite genetics in our shedders, and with that comes tail length. At the moment, we're pushing fertility and growth and muscle and fat and WEC in front of tail length. I don't really I'm not seeing it on farm in our stud flock that there's any issues with the longer tails. We cull anything that's daggy in January, and there's not many of them. So we're not pushing it at the moment. I think potentially down the track, but I think we're a fair way off. Going that way.
Yeah. And what about you, Ross?
Well, we've been recording tail length in both flocks for 5 or 7 years or something now, and it's not been a big focus, but we just figured that it is a trait that's highly heritable. So if we can reduce the need to be tailing, then why not? So the tails have definitely shrunk a bit. The Coopy's tails are shorter than the Wiltshires in general. But we've also come to the realisation that dags are more important than how long the tail is. If it's always clean, it doesn't really matter how long the tail is. So we're putting more emphasis on that. I think Daniel's dead right. The dags are more about what's going on inside the sheep than what's going on outside of it. So we'll just keep chipping away at it.
Yeah, definitely in terms of the fly sort of management and things like that with the dags, if they've got, from what I've seen, the hairier type tails that molt are keeping less dag on them and things, whereas if they've still got a quite woolly tail, it doesn't really matter the length of the tail, it's what that coat is on the tail that seems to be collecting the dag or not. But as you say, it's what's going on inside the sheep as well as to what's producing that dag. So we want to try and reduce that to get there.
Can I just make a comment on the fly thing? We haven't dipped any sheep since 2013, and so that preceding that was quite a period of culling anything that did get fly. So I'm not suggesting people just stop dipping overnight, but susceptibility to fly is heritable and repeatable. And 2013 was a very wet, humid year. Sorry, not 2013, 2023 here in New Zealand, and the fly challenge was extreme to the point where we had cattle getting fly strike, and our coop was undrenched, undagged, stud Coopworth ram lambs. We had about maybe 1 or 2% got struck, and some fully shed Wiltshire ewes that we brought in from the Hawke's Bay, so a lower rainfall area. 20% of those got struck within 6 or 8 weeks of being here. So, and I know that in this area around here, which typically summer's hot and humid, there's plenty of people with Wiltshire sheep that are still getting fly and still having a dip. So my suggestion to them is that I'd just leave them long enough that they start getting struck, identify those ones and get them out of the flock.
Yeah. Bit of a question from the audience. Fergus just messaged. Is there anyone saying about processors' attitude towards longer tails?
Yes, I've had a bit to do with this, Emma. There was rumours around in Australia that the processors don't like the long tails. I myself was involved with WAMCO, which is a farmer-owned cooperative, for 20 years. I was chairman of it for 15 years, and there was certainly no penalty, no thought of a penalty against tails. In this country, that rumour came from one particular processor running into trouble with a contract to another food company, and part of his payoff for his costs was to come out of the skin value. Well, the market for skin value collapsed, and he was left with a huge cost. And as the Dorpers and the hair breeds, they had a few issues, or they thought they had a few issues. They said, well, that was a good reason. We don't like tails, and they don't like hair sheep. So we've had practically no trouble with that. But it's the tail length is, we inherited this when we developed the ultralight. I don't know where it came from. It just came in one ewe, the worst looking ewe in the flock, but it's very heritable. It was about 30% heritable. So we find that two things to seem to go with. The hardiness goes with, if you get a good short tail, generally they're hardy and have a thick butt around the tail. The other one is generally in the Dorper cross, they have a lot of hair, and they're the ones that carry the good silky coat. So it's been a bonus for us. The other one is the retailer. We had a company from England look at our sheep as they came to the abattoirs, and they spotted these sheep with short tails. And they said, well, what's this all about? And I told them, how big is the flock? How many of these sheep is there in Australia? And you can see it ticking around his mind. This is going to be a selling point for his business in future. And it only needs something like that and a push from the animal welfare, and we'll be under compulsory tailing, or we've got to use a lot of sedation. So it's a welfare issue, I believe, in the future that we need to address anyway.
Yeah, I think, and Ferg probably knows more about this than I do, but over here, NZ Merino are only taking wool from people that are using anaesthetic at docking time. Yeah. So on the wool type and the shedding side of things and the tail lengths and things, Nick, have you found any correlations with anything good or bad going on?
Yeah, well, so we did. We looked at the correlation between shedding and the amount of wool that we were getting off our sheep. So fortunate set of technicians, and we all have a good fun going over, and sheep are being shorn, and every fleece goes into a tray, and we weigh each tray. Basically, as the proportion of shedding went up, we got to the point where if someone opened the door into the wool shed while you're walking across it with your tray of wool, you didn't actually have anything to weigh by the time you got to the scales. And part of that was we had some sheep who, like you say, as everyone else has pointed out, some were producing like hair, and you could see it on the shearer's arms. So you'd be covered in little short white stubble, like someone's been shearing Santa in the shed. And then other ones would be woolly, and you'd have this very nice fleece, but it'd only be, 2 or 3 centimeters long. It wasn't a proper staple. It was only short wool. And we found that was going through. The other thing we've noticed is there's pretty much been no difference in DAG score between our Romani lambs and our Wiltshire lambs once we account for internal parasites. So once we have a fecal egg count, that accounts for them being high or lower. Like I say, it's what's happening inside them that's causing that. Tail length, we haven't really gone into measuring them because they're all, like, the flock's tails all got taken off last Friday, so we're still tailing by practice on the farm. We haven't shifted to not doing it, and that's partly where we end up sending those lambs for either finishing or slaughter afterwards. It's still benefits the farm to take the tail off.
Yeah. In the nudie flock, we measured all the tails at docking time, so we still took all of the tails off, except for a handful of the purebred ewe lambs. But yeah, we measured all the tails as we were going down the docking chute. Yeah, bit of experience there.
The low input CPT that was run in South Canterbury, I think 2018 through 21, was it, Ross? Yeah, measured tail length, and I think the beef and lamb genetics CPTs now all measure tail length across all their CPT sites. So, like quite a few skeletal traits, its heritability is about 0.8, so pretty easy to make rapid gain. The biggest issue is lack of variation within breed. So you can have 0.8 heritability in a Romani, but all the tails are long. So that's the issue, just finding that variability. Some of the composite breeds have that variation there. But again, like it's DAG score was Scovey's work, I think, showed that the presence or absence of DAGs wasn't related to tail length. So
yeah. So I think there's 2 or 3 genes involved in the length of the tail. It's all about turning the genes off that are going to make the tail longer.
We've got pure fin ewes whose natural tails are not legal length.
Yeah. We were measuring the tails, so particularly in the half-bred nudies, we were looking at the bear points index on the SIL data, so that required us to measure the length of the bit of skin that goes down the tail and then the full length of the tail, and I think there's a ratio that goes into that. You score the head, the breech in the belly as well at weaning time. So we have information going into all of that. Cool. We might go into a little bit of a couple of more in-depth questions for each breeder. So Daniel, we'll start with you. I guess you've touched on a little bit about why you've sort of developed the Meat Master and what went into that. But what trends are you seeing in the industry, particularly in regards to reproductive performance of the shedders versus traditional dual-purpose sheep?
Down here amongst my scanning customers, we've got a handful of Wiltshire-based flocks or shedding flocks, not a huge number. So we're just starting to see a few trends. We've got a couple of scanning customers who've last year made the change from Romneys to shedders. So they've started with a small shedding flock and are now at the point they've decided that's the way they go. So as a general trend, and it's a bit hard to take general trends when you're sitting in the scanning tree, is that the shedding hoggets tend to scan better than woolly hoggets. The shedding to-do tend to scan worse, but the shedding ewes tend to scan better again. Quite a few people that kill woolly sheep, particularly dry hoggets and shedding dry hoggets, are pleasantly surprised that the shedding hoggets tend to kill out better, even though their agents always inform them they'll kill out worse. I think 3 inches of wool on a woolly sheep adds a lot of visual weight that doesn't translate to the hocks. And it's one of the reasons that I think a lot of people say that shedding sheep have poor carcass conformation. It's not that they have poor carcass conformation, they've just got no wool to give them shape. So we are definitely starting to see a trend across to shedding sheep here. And it's probably quite evident in North Canterbury. In the last 3 years, we've gone from 2 shedding sheep breeders in North Canterbury to 11. So we've got a sudden influx of rams on the market as well. And I think it's a way forward. Yeah. I think nationwide shedding sheep numbers are up 20%, whereas the ewe flock's down 5%.
World domination, here we come.
Yeah. In my own flock, the shedders on lambs winged outperform everything else. Up until we bought Wiltshire Next Liner, and we on a sort of 60 kilo ewe, we were weaning between 185 and 205%. Fins were doing a little below that, and the Texel based ewes another sort of 10 or 20% behind that. Yeah, not quite the growth rate that the straight Texels had, but and that was lamb survival was outstanding.
Cool. So Ross, we've got some couple of questions for you now. So first of all, the Coopworths were already quite bare and very highly productive. Obviously, you're mixing and matching and putting a bit of Wiltshire into the Coopworths and a bit of Coopworth back into the Wiltshires as well. How are they comparing between the two still?
So I have unmuted. Yes, I have. So I've jotted down a few notes here. So the first, I think I mentioned earlier on that they're like chalk and cheese in a lot of ways. So we've been rattling on here a bit talking about Wiltshires, but I'm pretty confident that the vast majority of the Wiltshires in New Zealand are actually what Australia call a wilty pole. So they are quite a flighty sheep, whereas our Coopworths are very free moving, but a very calm, intelligent sheep. So there's chalk and cheese there. In terms of the fertility, the Coopworths all scared sort of between 170% in a hard year, and 220% or higher if you feed them too much. So we don't flush ewes coming up to mating with the Coopies. We tend to screw them down to minimise the number of triplets as much as possible. The shedding flock sort of scanning around 160, 170. Lamb survival, just people talk anecdotally a lot about the survival of the shedding lambs, which is true. They are quite a lot smaller at birth than the Coopies. But when I look at the survival index, the New Zealand DPS, our Coopworth flock is averaging 800 and the shedding flock's averaging 400. The national average is about 300 for survival. Similar thing with a lot of the other traits. The Coopies are extremely eczema tolerant, a very long history of testing for eczema. So we're testing those at 0.68 and really only getting slight reactors. The Wiltshire flock is improving pretty rapidly, but our ewes mainly came from a very tolerant background from David Arvidsson. So we're testing those at 0.57. So yeah, quite a difference there. In terms of growth, the Coopies averaging 1,800, the shedding flock 1,400, the national average is 1,300. Meat's quite interesting that the two flocks both average about 500 on the meat index, whereas the national average is about 300. Worm feck, again, we've been working on that for a long time with the Coopworths, and not so long with the shedding flock because we haven't had them as long, but the Coopworth flock's average feck index is 680. The shedders have come up to 350, and the national average is 50. The interesting thing with if I steal a bit of time here, worms is something I'm quite agitated about. We drench as little as possible. We don't drench adults who use it all. And barber's pole can be a big challenge in this warm, humid environment that we have through the summer. And we don't really see barber's pole much in the Coopies anymore, whereas the shedding sheep when we first got them were much more susceptible. They are getting better at handling barber's pole now. And the other thing that we're pushing along in both flocks is condition score, and they both average about the same. So 460 on the shedding condition score index compared to the national average of 350. So, and I have to say that the best of the shedding sheep are right up there with the top end of the Coopworths. So they've got the genes are all there. We just got to select them out and build the numbers on.
Yeah. Just while we're talking about the worms, there's a comment or question in the Q&A asking about Feck versus Kala. Which one should we be using or focusing on going forwards? I think Richard Shaw is also in the audience as well, so he'll have a comment on that, being Kala. But yeah, from my experience, both would be the best option. If you can get a breeder that is doing both, or as a breeder, if you do both, that'll make the most progress. But in saying that, in New Zealand, at least, we're still trying to get breeders doing one or the other. So at this point, picking someone that's doing something versus someone that's just doing nothing in the recording would also be a benefit. But if anyone else has any comments on that one quickly, especially Rob, you're doing a bit of parasite resistance is one of your big points as well.
Yeah, we don't have a hell of a lot of Kala over in Oz, so I can't really speak on that. But no, parasites, we're 1200 mil rain for heavy clay soils, plenty of creeks for worms to just keep going right through the summer. So it's constant battle, and a fair focus. These numbers probably don't mean too much for the New Zealand, but we're we've got Sire in the side team that's neg 92 on WEC now, which 92% less worms means that there's not, he's breeding animals that are just, extremely resistant. And, and really removing a lot of that drenching need. I guess it's a balancing act with all the other traits. We're not solely going on that, like a bit like the tailing thing. We've got to keep an eye on the productivity of the sheep. If we solely go down that worm path, we're going to forget about the other stuff. So it's trying to move it all there in a balanced animal. But I think in Australia we're probably a little bit different than New Zealand. There are plenty of places that get good summer breaks where worms aren't quite as much of an issue. But I think there's a big push in Australia for just labour, efficiency in prime lamb operations to, get that DSE, that dry sheep equivalent, up per labour unit, and drenching and shearing are two of the biggest sort of workloads in sheep, I would have thought. So there's a fair push for genetics that can get rid of those two things at the moment. There's a lot of people looking at those, and we're trying to push both of them pretty hard.
Cool, thanks. Has anyone else got any other comments on Feck versus Kala?
I could jump in there with my opinion. My view is that if a breeder is doing a good job of the following the worm Feck protocol, that should be capturing sheep with Kala, because Kala is just one tool, if you like, that sheep can use to handle a worm burden. And if I'm pretty sure that our sheep will be using every tool that's available to them because of the amount of selection pressure that we're putting on them. So I think in my opinion, solely focusing on Kala, you're going to be missing out on some other genes that could be helping the sheep.
I agree with Ross on that one. The other advantage of doing worm Feck is if you manage to line your ducks up and you can get a good sustained long, high worm challenge in your ram hoggets, and then if you're really lucky and you manage to coincide an autumn weight and an eye muscle scan and a DAG score, you can then record that data when they're under a good high parasite load. So not only are you getting data on their ability to remove worms from their system and be worm resistant, but then you're also finding those animals that can grow and produce meat and not produce eggs under a massive worm challenge. And that I think is really important as well. So you get some, while you don't get any formal resilience selection, you do get some secondary resilience selection. And taking feed samples as ram hoggers go into scanning crates is actually a pretty easy way to do it, because you just do the one before he goes into the scanning crate pretty easily.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's all somewhere. It was an area where it tripped me up when I started. When I started out, I thought we were producing rams or seed stock for ourselves and probably into the pastoral dry areas of Australia. It turned out that there's more demand in the southern areas of Australia than the wetter areas, and we've had inquiries from New Zealand into the same area. So our problem is to get a suitable test to do, to get enough challenges to our sheep to give off enough worm or catch a worm burden. We've just tested some this last week. They're ram lambs that we want to use at 6 months old. They're just over 4.5 months now. So we've got to set them back to be able to do a collection. So it is problematical, but it certainly is a help. And we did inherit some resistance in the sheep that we imported from New Zealand for the HF plus gene. Obviously, they've been tested for worms down there.
Cool. Thanks for that. Getting back to Rob, in terms of the parasite resistance and prioritising good production and shedding within your flock, what have the challenges been with that?
With the weighing up of what you're breeding, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, just balancing all the objectives, given that production, worms, and shedding are all quite high priorities.
Yeah, I think it's probably no different to any sheep breeder, whether worms is in your bucket of things that you're focusing on, or whether it's all the other traits. Like everything's a way, a way up. Everything's just trying to balance that animal out. I wouldn't think there would be too many sheep breeders that just don't want a really well balanced animal in all traits. You don't need to be, in the top 1% of everything. I mean, we want that, and we want the unicorn, but it's pretty hard to find that unicorn. You need some of those outlying animals, I think, to try to move the needle and bring those in to get genetic gain. But no, we want a balanced animal. If we focus on one thing too much, like we'll forget about the rest of it. So it's all about balance.
Cool. Thanks, Rob. Dawson, so Ferg has mentioned that you're doing out-of-season breeding. How, I suppose that's got a lot of the Dorset influence in there as well. How has this developed with the shedding sheep?
It's a challenge. We started off, as I said, just doing one lambing a year, but our ewes were getting too fat, and we were wasting opportunity. I look at it as a wasted opportunity. That the ewes only functioning for 2/3 of the year when you can get more out of it. So we chose to go every 8 months. Sometimes we mate the ewes with lamb on. Sometimes we wait till we wean them. But we're really looking to get rid of our lambs before we lamb the next ewes start lambing down. So we've got to get our lambs off under 6 months at weights ranging from 50 kilos up live weight. The big driver of success in this lambing process is finding feed that is cheap enough to make your project viable. We've in the last couple of years have come on to doing silage in quite a big way. Now, just the exact cost of that, I've never really worked out, but it's certainly the cheapest form we've found of supplementary feeding, because if we lamb in July, that's no problem. Those sheep will go through and the lambs will finish in early November, early December, and we're rid of them. We've still got reasonable feed. But the March lambing is a difficult one because the ewes run in the last semester under tough conditions. Then they lamb in April in dry conditions, and they probably won't have good green feed until probably mid-June. So the challenge is just to stop them drying and going off their milk and the lambs turning out woody. As you probably all know, once the lamb goes woody, it costs you a lot to get them going again. But with the sides, it does appear to be working. The sheep are full and contented all the time. Our wean numbers are going up. But initially, getting used to lamb 3 times a year, our first lot of conceptions were in the low 70s for a mating. And so we culled. Of course, there could have been some influence of non-breeding sheep in there, but I'm not sure where it was. But then we've progressively culled the sheep that don't mate, particularly in the June and October matings. And we're nearly probably 90% now conception we get. If we're doing a 1 year mating just once a year, we'd be up around the 95 to 97%. That was pretty consistent. So there is a sacrifice there. It doesn't appear to have taken too many twins out of the system. We look for twins, but certainly not triplets. But it's a matter of getting a feed source that's cheap enough for you to be able to do that, and that's the challenge. And I see there's plenty of opportunities, even in grain-producing farmers. They could run their lambing ewes on stubbles, so there doesn't have to be a lot done. But if you want to run it intensively, as we do, it's got to be a fair bit of provision made for out-of-season feeding.
Yeah, no, cool. Thanks, Dawson. Appreciate the effort that goes into it, especially in a drier area. Cool. So next, a couple of questions for Nick. Firstly, a Q&A from Daniel. Whereabouts can we find the information, the data from the Riverside trial?
So most of it's coming through in scientific publications now. So the first couple of years of production data. So Renee Corner-Thomas and Steve Morris published on the production data. It's always a challenge if you've got a research project going and you say to the university, would like to have a page that we can host all this stuff on. Their usual response is, can you get something up on there every couple of weeks? So like, well, no, because sheep take X amount of time to grow. So looking at 1 a year, and they sort of go, oh, maybe not. But I'm certainly more than happy to send any of that information out. And then in a bit under a month, we'll have an open day at the Riverside Farm itself on the 18th of November. Might be a bit of a drive for Dan to get to. But again, I can send you down the slides that we end up making for it, which just gives some details, which is what I've got actually open on this side of my screen so that I keep it in my brain. So when you're talking about scanning percentages before, ours is actually pretty much mirrored years. So we haven't lost any scanning percentage. So we've had hoggets anywhere between 110 to 160% lambing or scanning. And then our two tooths have been scanning between 180 and 230. But yeah, if I do have to, and part of the project is find a way that we can get the data or the analysis out to more people to see.
Yep, you're welcome to put it on the hub on here.
Yep, sweet. Yep. I will work out how to do that, and then I'll put it on there.
Yeah, have a chat to myself or Ferg. We'll get it on there.
Yep.
Cool.
Sweet.
So on the Wiltshire project, part of that was the financial modelling.
Yep.
What were any of the findings or the results?
So that one's, we've just gotten a PhD student started on it.
Yeah.
So as with most things in academia, it goes much faster if you put a student on it because it's their sole job. So he started this month. So hopefully early next year, we'll be starting to roll out that financial information, because it's probably taken us up until this lambing to get enough data to do it justice. The early modelling was based on sort of talking to people and just saying, what do you think this number should be? What do you think that number should be? Now we know what our scanning percentages are at different proportions of different breeds as our grade up goes through. We know how much fleece is being left on these sheep, so at what point don't we have to pay for them to be shorn? And then we can also start to put in modelling, like if you don't do tailing because you don't have to, where's that saving? But is there going to be a financial penalty? I saw a question pop up before about agents and the price difference, and we've found that as well at Riverside. So the agent will sort of undercut the price by about 10% because they're wilties, and then tell the person that they're going to that they're actually going to kill out just as well as what they would have brought as a Romani. So in general, what they're doing is paying less for an animal that's going to grow as well, if not better, and making an extra bit of money on doing so. Because who doesn't do that?
Yeah. Is there, so the question about that is, someone said that they're interested in lamb performance in New Zealand setting, have heard many negative comments from traders about shedding sheep. They're currently generally priced slightly lower than traditional lambs. There's a chance that the negativity comes from the lambs looking different to what we're used to, which we touched on before, about just lacking that wool and sort of not knowing, well, not associating that look, the carcass of a traditional sheep.
Yeah, so 2021 year, so 2020 born, 2021, so that was our first cross. Slaughter weights were 43 kilos for Romneys and 48 kilos for Wiltshires, born in the same flock at the same time. Carcass weights were 17 kilos versus 21. So they actually had a higher dressing out percentage and a higher carcass weight from the Wiltshire cross. The next year, when we went to the 3 quarters, there was nothing in it. It was 44 versus 43 kilos at slaughter. So a 19 kilo carcass and a 20 kilo carcass. And then the last one I've got records for here is 2023 slaughter. The Romneys were 45 kilos and the Wiltshires were 51 kilos at slaughter. So we are seeing a consistently higher dressing out percentage from the shedded genotype. Some of that will be coming through from fleece weight in there as well. So we know they've got slightly thicker skin.
How much of that would be a hybrid vigor effect, not necessarily a shedder effect?
Yeah, so there's definitely that happening. With thinking it's less so as we get further into the proportions, but there's also the ancestral breed in the polled Wiltshires that we've brought into New Zealand had a larger genotype in them. So we've found that the mature ewe weights have gone up in those animals as we've done that serial grading. So first cross has definitely got, have 100% heterosis in it, and then we've got 50% in the next generation, 25%. So it's dropping out, but a little bit in there.
Cool, thank you. A question from the audience for Dawson about the aseasonal breeding. How many kilograms of weaned weight of lamb and number of lambs do your aseasonal ewes produce per year?
That's a hard question to answer because we haven't exactly got figures to differentiate between the ewe lambs, their results, and the matures. But as a ballpark figure, it'll be around the 130% we're getting from non-carriers of the HF plus gene, and you can add probably another 15% on for a single copy of the gene, another 30% on for a double copy. So 30%, another 15, so it's 30% total increase with the cropping. That's based on easy care management, low very little attention paid to the ewes during lambing. They're put in the paddock and they've got to do it on their own. But it's when we weren't when we weren't doing accelerated lambing, we were getting probably another 5 or 10% more than what we're getting with the accelerated lambing now. Now that we've got away from the 70% scanning results to start with, up around the early 90s. And I think we'll do better. There's obviously a heritable trait in there that we are getting rid of. I believe there is a genetic test we can make now to find those sheep, but we haven't been able to do that yet. But it's that's what we're looking. We're looking at trying to get 1.5 times what we get in a normal one season lambing. We haven't quite cracked that, but it is possible. I can see that.
Sorry, another quick question from the same person. What is the ewe weight of your sheep, Dawson?
Yeah, that depends too, again, on the genetic makeup of our sheep. My aim is to get just a moderate ewe size around the 80 kilo, and that if you don't concentrate on a balanced sheep with equal muscle and equal growth, you'll finish up with a huge sheep around the 100 kilos. But we're trying, by keeping, and when I say equal muscle, I don't know whether everyone understands the lamb plan, but a +3 for muscle and at least a +13 for growth, that's a balance. And if you can take that up, your growth rate increases, but your mature weight remains reasonably low. So it's to be around about 80 kilos. So probably 75 to 85 would be the range.
Probably worth noting that mature ewe sizes inversely correlate with rainfall. Where they stay away from worms and stay away from challenges, they go to big ewes, like having shifted sheep around the place a bit. So 80 kilos at Hillcroft Farms might be a 70 kilo ewe somewhere else, or 65 even. There'll be some Kiwis on here thinking 80 kilos is massive. So.
What about lambing ewe lambs? That keeps their mature weight down a bit too, Ferg.
Yeah. But there's massive environmental influence, I reckon. Yeah. Like where there's no worms and less worm challenge and stuff, they definitely, and just a kinder environment, they definitely don't grow as big. They definitely grow bigger.
Cool. So a few traits for anyone to just jump in and comment on their experience. And we've touched on a little bit of this already, but lamb survival, and in particular that effect of that birth coat of hair versus wool type, and potentially on skin thickness. What's everyone been seeing?
As I said before, I've been, where I can, selecting for birth coat up until we started AIing with outside sires. In fact, for a period of time, we killed everything that wasn't a hair birth coat. And now we very much tend to select sires that were hairy at birth, although obviously outside sires are either unknown or aren't. It does make quite a big impact. Although having said that, only 15% of lambs that die at birth die due to the weather. The bulk died for other reasons. So it does have an impact. I sold a number of fin rams in the early days into Australia, into the soft rolling skin people and merinos, and they assured me at the time that the thicker the skin, the shorter and hairier the fibre, and the thinner the skin, the longer and finer the staple. So I do wonder whether shedding sheep tend to be thicker skinned anyway. But it's not something I've actively measured. Although I do know when you try to get hold of a big, muscly, hairy ram, there's no wool to hang on to, and you can't grab hold of a handful of skin either because it's thick and tight.
I think you noticed, Daniel, you would notice that the fly strike on a cheddar is less, penetrate the skin way less than it does on a merino. In fact, I don't know if they're all like it, but I find the Dawson, they just don't penetrate the skin. So obviously the skin is thicker and harder.
Yeah. a lot of the nudie genetics that were, I mean, they were in easy care over in the UK that we got in for Wairere, came from a guy called Hayden Woolley, and he had about 2,000 or 3,000 of the easy cares and similar number of the Romneys, and he did a bit of mothering on and bits and pieces here and there, and he sort of suggested that a Romney lamb skin, you could just poke your thumb through it while you were skinning it, and the shedder type, the easy care type, was almost like a deer hide. It was real thick and really hard to poke a hole in.
I was just trying to find numbers because we sent some of the hides to Lazarus, so the leather and shoe research centre here in Palmy, and we did find that the hide thickness was different between the shedding type and the Romney. So with the shedding sheep having a thicker skin, which helps a bit with insulation as well when they're born with less wool on them.
Ultimately, certainly in New Zealand, from a selection point of view, DPS, dual purpose survival, is, in my opinion, still king. So you can have thick skin and hairy coats, but at the end of the day, we just want lambs that live. Doesn't really matter why they live. It's a bit like the worm feck scenario. We just want them to live. And like I say, only 15%, I think, is the data that die of the weather. So there's still 85% of the lambs that die for other reasons, because they're dumb or their mum's dumb or whatever reason. So we just need to rule that out. And as you know, our lambing percentage in New Zealand is still creeping up. So that survival is probably becoming more and more important. But as things go up, we're still starting to see, we see more and more triplets every year. Everyone might protest that they don't want triplets, but no one seems to want to stop feeding their sheep to get triplets. So we need that high survival genetics to keep those lambs alive, whatever the reason for the high survival genetics.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think like chasing ewe rearing ability or I think over there it's survival. Like I think we're probably going to get bigger gains than that, and being able to breed that balanced, keep breeding that balanced animal instead of trying to, for me, I think it's, we're recording everything at birth, recording all birth coats, but I don't think we're not putting any too much selection pressure on it and letting, ewe rearing ability and weaning rate sort of numbers push that side of it up, I think.
I think in New Zealand, just in sheep flocks in general, there is an uptake of DNA parentage, which is losing a bit of that survival recording. They just, they were scanned in there and then they just haven't showed up at docking time. So there's no record of were they born dead, what was the reason, can you identify it, etc. going on. So I think we are possibly, as much as DNA parentage and using the genomics and all that sort of thing, there's a heap of benefits out there. Survival is probably the most hard hit trait in that shift. So for the likes of Ross, who's still tagging at birth, you'd be noticing and recording anything that you're seeing as dead, wouldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And coding whether it was born dead or whether it was got up and had a feed and then died or whatever. So just trying to get as much detail around that death as possible. And if for anyone listening who is a breeder that is doing DNA parentage, just go out there and pick up the dead lambs and DNA them, and you'll get a whole lot of information. Don't be so tight-fisted.
Yeah. There's a question just come up for you, Ross. If you put a shedding ram with Coopworth background that may still carry some non-shedding genes over ewes that still have wool, will it slow down the shedding transition?
That might be a question for Nick. So if it's a fully shed ram, but he's quarter Coopworth, I've got a ram I've used in both flocks, so he's a 50-50 Wiltshire Coopworth, but he's fully shedding. He has been since he was a 2 to. I didn't actually record him as a lamb, so I don't actually know whether he shed that early or not. But I can't actually tell you whether his, because there'll be a range from when you start crossbreeding anything. There's always that range from some that don't look any different to one parent to some that look just exactly like the other parent. So I'm not sure. Are you able to comment on that, Nick?
I can make a stab in the dark. I don't think it'll change the time to transition any more than if you used a fully shedding breed type that has the same thing. It doesn't carry. They're not all homozygous for shedding. Because last quick look I looked at, so for their genomes that we've got, I'm counting somewhere in the region of 20 plus genes that are involved in this process. So it's not one or two, like tail length, real quick to shift that. But if you've got a ram who can be homozygous or heterozygous at 20 different sites and give you the same phenotype, we just don't know what that genotype is behind it. So you could use a Coopworth with a woolly background, or you could use a shedding type who's come from a completely shedding line and have the same thing crop up, that they produce woolly offspring.
New Zealand has a research BV, shedding BV, which currently is lamb shedding, which shows a really good correlation. So we're desperate, on a sweet side note, we're desperate for more ewe shedding data. So if there's any still recorded shedding breeders on here that aren't recording ewe shedding, get recording it and get it into SIL so that we can get a ewe shedding BV. Ewe shedding has about double the heritability of lamb shedding. Ewe shedding is a good predictor of lamb shedding, but lamb shedding is not a good predictor of ewe shedding. But those BVs actually drive shedding quite well. So if you are in that transition stage, particularly that second cross, then my thoughts are that's when you pay attention to shedding BVs and chase those rams with really high shedding BVs. If you're attempted to use raw shedding data on your ram catalogues, just be really wary of when they're collected. Some collect shedding data at weaning, some collect shedding data in the autumn, some collect shedding data in the spring as 12 months old, some collect all three. But the shedding BV irons all that out, and particularly, hopefully, we'll get a ewe shedding BV in the very near future, which will be even better. So for my sins, I'm the group manager for the Shedding Sheep Improvement Group, of which Ross is a member as well. And even within that group, with a common aim and working together, we've still got quite a range in when we record shedding, ranging from weaning right through to the autumn. So just double check, and just because an animal's not a shedding score 10 when it was recorded doesn't necessarily mean it was bad. It might have just meant it was recorded quite early in the shedding process.
Yeah. I'd also add that the shedding score is free to record for those that are not doing it yet. All it takes is a little bit of time.
Along with the score and body condition score.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've got a question from the audience quickly. Just how do shedding BVs relate to what you actually see on the ram?
Yeah, I think that's mentioned before, the variability in ages to shedding, but I've found there's quite a bit of difference between sheep born in our December lambing to the March to the July lambing. July lambing seems to be ones of the most predictable and reliable. From then on, the December ones are not quite as bad, but the ones born in March we find are very hard to predict. But it's pretty, once they, like Ross, Daniel said, once they get to a ewe age, it's more stable and predictable. But I find lambing out of season just makes it harder. That's what I've observed.
Lamb shedding's very environmentally influenced. So early born single lambs on old ewes will shed early, especially those that are growing fast. Late born lambs on hobbits and tudus are highly unlikely to shed. Poor nutrition stops them shedding. So there is that aspect as well, which is why it's really hard to use raw data around shedding, particularly lamb raw data. in my own flock, we've had a pretty tough spring. We've got an old ewe here, an old 7-year-old ewe, who has been a reliable early shedder. Since I've noticed her out of the mob, she's always been the first ewe to shed. She blows the wool off in about 4 days. So last year she was fully shed on the 20th of September. As of today, she still has not started this year. So last year I did my first shedding score the last week in October, and with quite a number of 10s. This year we haven't got anything started yet, just on the back of parasite burden, cold spring as well. So the question about the shedding BV, I have seen some data from Ag Research and BLG showing the showing, I think it was sire data, showing the BV of the sire versus the average shedding of the offspring. The early data was predicted it pretty well, but it was still quite a spread scattergram. The second lot of data I saw was 3 or 4 years later, with obviously a lot more phenotypes and genotypes and data gone in, and that line had tightened up. And so it was definitely a good line. As BV went up, then the shedding of the offspring went up with it pretty well. So.
Yeah, I was going to add to that and just say it's down to how many records you have. So the more records you can have on your ram, the better. So if you've got 2 lambs by him, you're going to be sort of firing off somewhere into that distance. If he's got 30 progeny that you've measured, you're now going to be zeroing in on where he's going to land.
Because day length change has such a big impact on it. I know in Australia, our sheep breeding values don't count any lamb shedding scores, so it's only shed scores from when they hit 1 year old. And I guess pretty simply, once you're at 1 year old, you get exposed to the same level of day length change through that spring period. We see it massively. Like the earliest born lambs, the ones that sneak into the back end of August, have such a bigger percentage shedding than those lambs off 1 year olds that are born late in November. They just don't see anywhere near the level of day length change, and probably don't get exposed to that better flush of spring feed as well. That I'm not too sure if it's an excess of energy or probably an excess of protein that ends up helping that shedding process as well.
Yeah, we definitely saw it with the nudie rams being sold. Some going to Northland, some going to Southland. The ones going to Southland were shedding a lot earlier than the ones going to Northland, just I'm assuming to the difference in that day length signalling.
Yeah, we're seeing the prolactin receptor as a big trigger of that shedding starting. So that'll be a receptor that's involved in turning shedding on and off, but then all the other genes that are involved are where that wool is going to actually fall off the sheep from. Whether it's only the neck, only the crutch, only the belly, coming up its sides, those are all going to be different genes or sets of genes involved in doing that. We've seen they were doing docking last week. There were lambs there that were starting to shed in October, and then when we go back and do the hogget weaning in December, we will see almost fully shed lambs from the ewes, and the hogget lambs are yet to start. So that's what shifted us to doing all our scoring in February for Wairarapa. When we're going and scoring Limestone Downs for lambs, we were scoring them in late January, so just a little bit earlier. And then we do our hogget scoring up at Limestone Downs in December. So that's as a year-old sheep.
Anything more to add on that, or on to the next trait? So hogget mating. Obviously, there's a lot of people out there mating their ewe hoggets in dual-purpose flocks. What's the hogget mating been like in the shedders for anyone?
Well, it's certainly not brilliant, but it never has been in any of the breeds I've been involved with. But I always look on it. It's money for jam if you can make it reasonably successful. And what I mean by successful, if you can get, and well, my experience on in the shedding breeds that I've got is that according to age, more so than weight comes into it, but age at 6 months and old, you can get about 60% of the lambs to conceive. At 7 months, it's about 70%. 8 months, about 8%, 80%, and then 9 months and older, you're up to 90 and better. And the losses seem to go in vitro the same. The earlier you mate them, the more losses there are compared to the later that mate them. Your twinning is not as high. Twinning is probably only, I suppose, the average on a non-fertility carrying ewe would be around the 150%, 160%. In the ewe lambs, it's probably about 120, 125%. So there's definitely not as good, but it's money for jam. And the ewe lambs will do it, and well, particularly in the breed we do, there's no setback. The best setback, of course, is they don't mature quite as big if they have a lamb as a lamb. And I'm talking about most of ours would lamb at 12 months.
So we didn't make many hoggets this year just because it was such a bloody dry autumn. And thank goodness we didn't, because I've never been so short of feed at lambing time. But interesting just watching the hoggets as they're lambing. The Wiltshires, we didn't get as good a percentage in lamb, but the ones that we did get in lamb lambed earlier. And they mainly had singles, whereas the Cookwas lambed later, but more twins. So I guess it's just the difference in that overall the Wiltshires aren't quite as fertile, so it was only the bigger ones that actually cycled and got a lamb, and most of them got one lamb pretty quick, whereas the Cookwas, that fertility, there was still plenty of them had twins, but they didn't cycle quite as, weren't cycling quite as fast right at the start of mating. And they're equally, the Cookwas are really good mums anyway, but I'm always amazed at how good of mums hoggets are, and the Wiltshires as a hogget tend to be better mums than if they're lambing for the first time as a tooth.
I've found I have found a bit of a difference actually. My shedders when we have mated hoggets, we tend to dive in and out of hogget mating a little bit, and the last 4 years we've experimented with early puberty hoggets, so mating hoggets in February, March, month before the ewes. A little bit of a copy of Cashmore Park in Victoria. So my shedders have outscanned even the fins as hoggets and outlambed even the fins, and then the fins have outlambed the others. We got a bit of a burn in 2021 when we got a little bit carried away, and the shedders actually scanned 180% as hoggets. That took a little bit of managing. The next year we jumped to the early puberty work, so mating them pretty young and pretty light. And of 4 years of early puberty, we've had one fin lamb in early puberty, and all of the other early puberty hoggets have been shedders. So they have all, and although having said that, 80% of them are either sons or daughters or granddaughters of one ram. So there is a little bit of that effect in there as well. We back to mating hoggets normally this year. More land, more rent, more lambs. And yeah, so the shedders, again, same order. Shedders slightly ahead of the fins slightly ahead of the fin texels. So
it'd be interesting. I have done a little bit of work looking at which ewe lambs that mate early and what their mothers have done, and so on down the track. I haven't done a lot of research into it, but there appears to be a correlation, strong correlation. The mothers that did it as lambs, their progeny to do it, and so on down. So it's probably a trait that we could put more pressure on in selection, and it's certainly pay off. Because there's no doubt about it, it's money for jam. You're running a ewe lamb for 11 months before you mate her, which doesn't make sense to me. There's another way.
Cool. So the next trait of interest, I guess, temperament. How have you found the behaviour of these sheep in the yards and in the paddock? And do you think that any of it is an effect of handling them less, or you're handling them just as much as everything else?
Yeah, I'm prepared to start on that, but I mightn't please everyone with what I say. But my experiences with Dorpers, white Dorpers are mad, black Dorpers are worse, Dammers are horrible. So when we started, we started with Dorpers crossing over Pole Dorsets, and my wife actually got a chick broken in 3 places from a Dorper jumping into them, a Dorper cross, and they were very unpredictable. What I did like about the Dorset was they are predictable. They will not jump into you unless they're forced to. So that was a trait. But it took us about 4 generations to get that out of the ultra white, and we have. You still get the odd one with a bit of fizz. We've had sheep with black feet that we've always been looking for because you don't get it in the white Dorper. So it's obviously come from the Dorset somewhere. But those sheep had a bit of fizz in them, and we just culled them. We couldn't, until we could get a ram that was quiet, we wouldn't use that. But we've got that now, and so we've bred that out of it again. So there's nothing you can't breed out if you do. But then going back the other way, when we brought the Texel Coopworth in, I'm not familiar with the temperament of a Coopworth, but I know Texels are very sluggish. They're a pain in the butt. As soon as you get them into the yards, they just don't want to move. It's not as though they're stubborn, but you've just got to push them. You'll push them and they'll walk 2 or 3 metres and stop. So you've got to go and push them again. They go another 2 or 3 metres, where we just want a good flowing sheep that's safe to work with. And I think that's what we've got to concentrate on. There certainly is danger in some of the breeds of sheep that are around for people that are not familiar with them. Had enough to set you, have I, Daniel?
No, not at all. I tend to agree with you, to be honest. Yeah, Dorpers I found pretty pig-headed. I've got a handful of scanning customers who have Dorper flocks, and we don't scan any of them because we can't get them up the race through the scanning crate. They just won't flow up a race. Well, having said that, I still do like a little bit of Dorper influence. I've had a wee play with Aussie whites. Both Aussie white rams I used. If I was changing the ram harness, I had to run their mob into the cattle yards to catch him and change his ram harness. The rest of the rams we changed in the paddock. So the Damaras, I've actually got a Damara ram on the place at the moment. If you're shifting a mob of rams, the Damara rams will be 20 metres ahead. It's just all leg and very mobile. We've got a big Texel influence, so we actually don't see a huge difference between the 2 flocks because there's broadly, there's a lot of Texel fit in both. But certainly when you're drafting, you notice that as you get through the mob, there's more and more shedders towards the end of the mob compared to at the start. But we're balancing that. I do put quite a bit of emphasis on temperament. Some of the early rams we had were very quiet and also had very, very high lamb survival. And I decided that quiet temperament led to quiet lamb survival because ewes were calm at lambing time and lambs were calm, lambs didn't run off. I like to put visual tags in my ram hoggets as early as possible, generally in April or earlier, so that when we're walking through or working with ram hoggets, we're looking for those rams that are on the far side of the pen because we want them with them sold, and we're looking for those rams that will come and stand beside you. So I've got rams that will walk up to me in the paddock and chew on your trousers and things like that. So we're looking for those nice, calm, quiet animals.
Yeah. Rob, so you've unmuted yourself.
No, we definitely notice a bit of a difference in it, but I do, coming back to what you said at the start, I do think a fair bit of it's from lack of handling. Like they don't see yards anywhere near as much. They don't get for the most part. They're not getting dragged over a board, being crutched or shorn, and that human like touch handling. So I think pretty naturally, and probably a fair bit of it, potentially is in genetics, but there's certainly a lot of that that handling side of it that I think has a pretty big impact. Whether you can totally work your way out of it with genetics, but for me, I can handle a little bit change in their behaviour if it means that we're not shearing and crutching and dagging and all the rest of it that goes with it. I haven't had any broken jaws or any of that side of it, so they're not running and jumping, but they're certainly a little bit different to handle the wool type, I would have thought.
Yeah, the experience we had with the nudies, they seem to be a very intelligent sort of a sheep. They're always looking for an exit, and so we found that yarding them, like pushing them up into the yards, was quite a bit different to dealing with any other sort of a sheep, in the sense that you get a Romani, the front of the mob gets to the end of where they're allowed to go, and they just sort of go, okay, I guess we're just sitting here now. Whereas the nudies tended to get to that front point, and as soon as the front of the mob got to there, and they went, right, there's no exit anywhere that I can see. There's an exit where we came from, and the whole mob would turn around and try and come back on you. So you had to be pretty quick on that side of things to get the gate shut behind them. But in the other sense of that, you could draft them without a dog because there was an exit that way and they were going. There was definitely pros and cons to it. If you're shooting through the paddock and just skipping into the next paddock really quickly to check that water trough or something like that and leave the gate open, they've seen that. They're very aware of that. If the grass is greener, they're following you. There's definitely not necessarily a temperament difference, but definitely a different bit of management around them with that. Yeah. Cool. Next question on the list is feet. Plenty of comments on the industry here in New Zealand about the quality of foot structure, and there's been some comments in the chat as well about particularly Dorpers with feet rotting off and things like that. What's everyone been doing there? I'd be interested to know, particularly for you, Dawson, being in a lower rainfall area, how those sheep shift out of your area as well.
Yeah, that's something we're very conscious of, Emma, is the fact that particularly now that there's more going into the wetter areas than the dry areas. But no, certainly we had some feed issues to start with, no doubt about that. Dorset's always had some feed issues and front shoulders, but Dorpers were terrible really in their feet and their shoulder structure. Shoulder structure was more about, as far as I could see, leg positioning on the carcass. A lot of shoulders too far forward, and they tend to walk out and then bow and roll. As soon as their foot rolls, then you get hooves that are malformed, etc. It's all about, so much of the foot problems and pastern problems are influenced by the positioning of the leg on the carcass. I use the top line as quite a measure in assessing the potential of the feet on a sheep. A good straight top line to me means that those legs are positioned in the correct place. If the legs are positioned too far forward, the sheep rolls on their feet. If they're put too far back, or too close rather, instead of having a recent heart room, to get the sheep to get balance will twist their feet out, and you'll get sheep walking around like this. And all of that is influences how high or how a sheep can get its head up to look around. If those legs are not positioned properly, then as soon as they put their head up, down goes behind their shoulders. And that's true to so many animals. I look at some of the beef cattle, they're shockers in that area. I don't know how they get on with their feet, but there's definitely a strong correlation between leg placement and foot structure and the resulting effects. So it's something we've placed a lot of emphasis on. It's very heritable. It's not hard to correct. It's just a matter of being diligent in 2 or 3 generations and you'll push through it.
Yeah, I agree with Dawson. The Dorpers, and in particular the Aussie Whites, brought bad feet to the table. It was the sting in the tail of the other good traits that they bought. And yeah, there's plenty of rams I've bought over the years where we've culled 100% of the progeny. But yeah, with that just comes a bit of learning, so you just get a bit pickier on what you're buying, and there's some really good footed Dorpers around if you're prepared to go looking for them. This often hidden one is particularly buying in a dry environment. You can buy really good structured animals with really good feet, but take them to a wet environment and they just succumb to foot rot bacteria anyway. So there's a little bit of balance there, which sometimes you don't always see. But yeah, like the first 4 important things on an animal are its 4 feet. If it can't walk, it can't eat. If it can't eat, it can't have lambs. So yeah, start on feet.
Yeah, I think it's been one of our biggest learnings and one of our biggest probably focuses has been the feet and the weaknesses of the shedding sheep. I think, especially in our really high rainfall and soil, heavy clay soil structures, feet go pretty quickly. So we've had to. It's probably our biggest wastage, I would have said, on cull rams is foot structure and soft feet. Trying to bring the wrong genetics into a wetter environment, leads to trouble. So yeah, we're definitely noticing that we've got to put a fair bit of selection pressure on feet, without a doubt.
Something I omitted to say is that I think we're a bit unfair on the Dorper because we were putting a big breed over a small breed, and maybe the leg structure, certainly the bone structure, wasn't good enough on the Dorper to carry the heavier ram of the Pole Dorset. So I think this part of it was ignorance on our part, and we should have been more prepared to watch out for it and correct it sooner. But the other interesting point you make, Robert, it's about the feet, the hardiness. We're striving to get black feet into our sheep. It didn't come naturally because the white Dorper you just can't get black feet into a white Dorper because there's obviously a white dominance in there. But we have got it in there now, and we find it's a better foot and an easier foot to manage than the softer white foot. But that's only my opinion. I don't think it's any more resilient to foot rot or foot scald, but it's a better foot to manage.
Yeah, so we've been scoring, or I say we, the vets have been scoring the foot conformation and locomotion on the sheep at Riverside the last couple of years, and the shedding sheep have been at a minimum no worse than the rest of the flock, no better, but we haven't gone backwards by using them. So that's probably the important part is that we quite often notice something that's wrong because it's a new thing. But to go back and if you've done your whole flock, going back to look at what it used to be like is a challenge. So we've got the benefit of having both running side by side, so we can go, this is what we already had. Is it actually worse? And currently we haven't seen it get worse.
I've got to put a plug in for next gen here. We've been very focused on structure and feet, and initially the Cookworth, and then carried that on with the shedding sheep when we got into those. And so we've been culling on a pass-fail system. So it was either good enough or it wasn't. And that we've made a hell of a lot of progress with that policy, but we're still getting sheep that were, say, 4, 5, 6 years old, who's were then, failing. And I wanted to get away from that. So Emma came up back in February, and we put every recorded sheep on the place over the board, scored their feet, teeth, etc., scored their feet for 3 different traits, and put all of that data into BVs. And the aim of that is to be able to find those lines where there's too high an incidence of sheep that aren't good enough, and be able to preemptively cull using those BVs. And I think that's going to be the next step forward for us. And so again, anyone out there that's breeding, shedding sheep, or if you're a commercial guy and you're going to your breeder, ask them how much effort are they putting into the feet and structure in general.
Yeah, I'd definitely add there. I don't know what the situation is with the Australian recording systems, but SIL in New Zealand are now letting us record these scores. It's a bit of a catch-22 at the moment, where breeders possibly are reluctant to do the scoring because they're not getting a BV yet, but still need more scores to be able to create the BV. So definitely encouraging people out there to be not just shedding sheep, but anyone in general, to be scoring so that we can get these BVs, so that we can start using that in selection criteria. There's nothing worse than a sheep that's, a ram that's 3 years old, that's been used a couple of times, losing out on the feet, and then not being able, for the commercial farmers in particular, not being able to identify his progeny that are, a considerable amount are going to do the same thing at 3 years old and be culled prematurely from the flock. So getting a BV on that will be a huge game changer. Right. I think we've already gone over an hour over our time. So I think we might wrap it up here. A huge thank you to all of our panelists for tonight. It's been great to get all sorts of experience from across the ditch on this webinar. And if anyone's got any more questions, this video will be put on the hub in the next few days once Sophie's got that all sorted out. So if there's any more questions, feel free to put them on there, and we can definitely ask anyone specifically any of those questions. But quickly, just before we go, we'll just go around and ask, if you were going to go down this path again, what advice would you give yourself in hindsight? And how much would strong wool have to be worth to convince you to go back into wool sheep? We'll start with Dawson because he's having a chuckle.
The evidence would have to be very, very, very strong. It's just freed up our lives so much, and plus it's something that I enjoy doing. But I think right from the start, I did have some vision of where I wanted to go, but that's got stronger as we go. And something that I haven't heard mentioned tonight is what we're actually breeding for. What's the end objective? And I heard criticism of the abattoirs or lambs not maturing or not being paid at the abattoirs. Really, the abattoirs are only interested in what they can recover from a sheep. So the value of the cut of meat that they can access from any given sheep determines their profitability. And so a good hind quarter or a very good top muscling in the top line is valuable to them. So I know it's all visual at the moment, or mostly visual. As soon as we get paid more for that, then I think we may be more conscious of starting out and thinking about what we want to breed. And also, we've got to breed something that the housewife wants to buy and eat. And if they don't want to do that, then we're in an industry that won't be profitable. So I think that's something I would very much advise anyone to think of what your end result wants to be and how you're going to get along through the process.
Thanks, Dawson. Daniel, you're next on my screen.
For me to go back to woolly sheep, obviously I've got some woolly sheep already, and I do like what I'm doing with them. But the reality is, if I was going to go all woolly sheep, would have to be looking at $15 a kilo all wool. Not really interested under that. It's just too much work involved. I'm sticking with my woolly sheep. I'm sticking with the fins. Sticking with my other woolly sheep because I've got them to a place I want them to be. So there's not going to get rid of them now. What advice would I give myself? Be a bit clearer on what my aims are and stick to them. I'm a little bit inclined to experiment and run off on tangents, which is a lot of fun, but it comes with a bit of heartbreak as well. So that's probably the main one.
Cool. Thanks, Daniel. Rob?
Yeah. So what would I do differently? Probably jump into it a bit earlier. We looked over the fence for a couple of years before we decided to just get stuck into it. So yeah, I'd love to be even another couple of years further down the track of transitioning. But and then the wool price, it won't get to a price where I'm wanting to go back there. As Dawson said, the reduced labour, and we shear in January, and that's when my kids are on school holidays, and the fact of sitting in a shearing shed for 3 weeks while they're on school holidays is the last thing I want to be doing. So I'm looking forward to getting rid of shearing completely, and we won't be going back.
Cool. And Ross?
So, should have started 20, 25 years ago. We actually bought got a few Wiltshire rams and used them as size for hogget mating for a few years, 20 or 25 years ago. Should have just carried on. But we've still got wool sheep, the biggest. We're still selling more Coopworth rams than we are shedding rams. But I think that the wool sheep need to adapt bloody fast to take a whole bunch of the work out of, so that the people that do want to carry on with wool, if wool does come back to $10 or $15 a kilo, we've got to get rid of the dags. If we lose the belly wool, who cares? Just wish I'd started earlier, sooner.
Yeah, you see it in the first cross sheep, trying to get away from the wool, that putting a woolly sheep back over your shedding sheep won't take much if people do want to go back that way. But yeah, they've got to be able to keep up with all the rest of the less workload, if that is where they go. Yeah. And anything else from you, Nick?
My one would just go back in time and say, here's some other stuff we should record as we go. Simply because we're getting genotypes, because genotypes on a handful of phenotypes is not as much fun as a dozen phenotypes and the same genotypes. So just help us expand out what we're looking at in that transition. Price wise, like the whole project started because wool was worth less than it cost. It cost more than it was worth, and it's currently still that state pretty much for the industry. So that's what's driven our research, is the fact that the industry didn't make any money on wool.
Cool. Anyone else have anything else for tonight, or shall we call it a night?
I'm gonna put another plug in for my open day at Riverside Farm. Again, might be too far for Dan to travel, or Dawson or Rob, but yeah,
fair way for Dawson.
Yeah,
Make it next year. We might be able to.
we do it every year.
Yeah. So that was on the 18th of November.
Yep. 18th of November at Riverside Farm.
Yeah.
Put it in the event section on the hub when you're filling your other data in, Nick.
Yep, I will.
While we're into plugs.
Yeah, it'll give me a job for tomorrow.
Excellent.
Cool. No. Awesome.
Just for those in the audience that are thinking of going shedding, Ross touched on it, and it's a line I've seen before. Best time to get into shedding sheep was 20 years ago, and the second best time's tomorrow. So go there, get started.
Yeah.
No.
Great.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks all. Fantastic.